Hi, welcome to Winadinho channel today. We are talking about a very difficult topic to even learn, much less defend during or against. The difficulties of breaking trauma looping. And this is a brain uh, situation that keeps us stuck in trauma bonding, toxic patterns, situations, relationships, and we can be controlled by the very nature of having looping traumatic memories and behaviors and chemicals flowing through our system. So, when a professional abruptly stops a client as or person from going into details of the trauma, their clinical perspective tactic is what they call boundary setting for containment, or also interrupting a trauma loop. What mostly is the case, however, is a person feels shut down or rejected by the clinician during their immediate crisis being experienced, and naturally so. They shut you down with clinical jargon and procedure, and you may be fresh on the scene to healing work or energy work or talking about trauma, and just boom, you're wrong out of nowhere. And it's not just a logical blow, the impact is deep within the psyche. The trauma mind is an emotional mind, subconscious mind. So it's a very major blow to experience these rejections and shutdowns. So what the disassociation or cognitive dissonance being perceived, the sort of the gap or the valley between the professional and the client, us the client feeling slighted or upset, on the other side of the Grand Canyon from the therapist or the clinician. This is a profound spatial and neurological mismatch between what our nervous system wants, our need, our urgent need to vent or need to be heard out, and between and at odds with what the therapist or the trained person knows as safe nervous system containment. Now, what is that? So let's get into this. As someone who's done over 2 decades of personal therapies, coaching, and self help, and so on, I find this topic necessary to get to the bottom of. In my lived experience, I've gone through this, and there have been a multitude of miscommunications over the years due to the initial inability to understand, my initial ability to understand. I was thrown in these networks, circles, therapies, sessions at very young, early age teens, and my inability to understand the complex trauma, and then later the trauma looping, or what they were, it's actually trauma looping, but what they would call as toxic patterns and unresolved childhood issues. There's a language to it that's just over our head, and you don't know how to make sense of it at all as an initial person going through this, let alone a young person. So to then having to go through that, to then having an expanding embodied self-awareness, so learning about yourself through having to go through all of that the hard way, and myself probing for questions about my brain. How do I operate? Or how was I operating at the time? Ultimately, what did they know about how I should be operating? And I wanted to know, naturally, to be at optimization. So the difficulties sometimes came as workers taking things personally, misusing psychological skills I didn't have access to understanding. And this was over 2 decades now. So back towards early 2000, in my youth, I still wasn't in any technological way advanced. Even in high school around that time, I hadn't Google wasn't, I mean, it was out, computers were out, but there was no such thing as everybody had when we had these smartphones. We didn't have all that. We didn't know these things. So when challenged, when I was challenged, they used the ultimate, no, when they were challenged, they used the ultimate power card. So I'm the boss over here, you're done, or worse, they're calling us security or threatening police or using these situations in court documents as proof of instability, all the while claiming all the while their claim was not valid as a psychological assessment, but yet these things were being used in family court at the time. Very traumatic decades of my life. The getting shut down, yelled at, threatened, treated disrespectfully, I went through all of that the hard way in therapy. Now, therapy doesn't have to be that way, but there are the point of this is that there are people with such complex trauma and traumatic issues that it's not just an easy 5-20 sessions of therapy. We have sometimes to do 100 or 200, and then the rest of our life be in psychological learning. So while this may sound like a juicy sitcom entertainment piece for some, perhaps neurotypicals, not requiring those 100 sessions of every kind of therapy and lifelong psychological learning, for those from broken backgrounds who've been termed neurodivergent, and which I have been. I guess I could say I'm that, although for another time that's a different topic to discuss, the word itself. So those forced to walk on the wild side of life our whole life. This is literally crucial, life-changing information to consider and understand, or to be able to understand. It's actually a privilege they feel. No, it's like air, water. In order to live in this world, especially if you're termed neurodivergent, you need to know how your brain works and be able to use it to your protection, much less or more your advantage. So, have you ever heard someone say put a lid on it before? Professionals use a tactic called trauma containment, consciously putting a lid on traumatic memories or intense emotional output until the client has the psychological coping skills to handle the distress. Now, this is contentious. So where this doesn't work is when a person's natural nervous system is either alerting that there's a distress, and so the person's voice will begin raising or giving a little bit of a edginess or attitude, being challenged with the concepts presented or being discussed. And the feedback being used is something like, you look upset, you have an attitude, when possibly that is just residual pressure resurfacing and needs properly guided release and not judgment, and especially not egging on the person psychologically with challenging us or name calling us, even if it's clinical names and labels. Labels are very stigmatizing, and they damage our well-being, but our self-esteem, our Holy Spirit within us. And when we are weak and early on in our healing journey, and we have years, sometimes millions of miles to go towards the Lord and our calling, we're very not unstable, but we need strength, and sometimes we're shut down at a very early age. And yes, this comes from the enemy, but what we are dealing with here is institutionalized, systemic, psychological abuses of power. So a professional who tells the person, us, who may be processing naturally, oh, it's time to shut down. I'm afraid you're being aggressive. And before you're out the door, asking or be able to ask, what are you talking about? They're calling someone. So you effectively shut down trust at this point and drive that vulnerable emotion deeper underground into dark and further complex trauma looping. So they're defeating their purpose. And then it's the blaming, I was going to say the calling the kettle black. Cat calling the kettle black. So interrupting rumination, stopping the repetitive cyclical replaying of the past pain. In trauma survivors, we're often driven by a repetition compulsion. This is a clinical term. An unconscious, agonizing drive to relieve the trauma in a desperate failed attempt to finally master the change or the outcome that we desire. So this is often subconscious when we don't even know how our brain is working. We're just replaying it, and we keep telling somebody in hopes that they will be able to help us figure out the missing pieces. So maintaining the window of tolerance, actively preventing a client from entering a state of hyperarousal, panic or rage, or other untoward emotions, or hypoarousal, like the disassociation or numbness. If a person pushes past this window, the therapy stops working entirely because the left prefrontal cortex, this side, goes offline. And they know that, but we're dealing with the possibility that they can be pushing us to that, not only pushing us offline, but hoping to see worse degenerative behaviors and backlash and traumatic expressions of hostility, and I don't know, some like a power and control game. Others use it for court purposes. Still others just enjoy seeing somebody struggle in their care while they have all the information and we don't. Whatever the motive is, it's a very heinous thing to experience when it's like being in the dark and you don't know what's there in the room and you're trying to ask and being punished for trying and asking. So why do professionals shut down the looping? I mean, it's not always bad when they know what they're doing. So to a person in immense pain, being stopped from looping feels like a cruel dismissal at the time that can trigger a severe subconscious collapse. Now, the collapses such as not wanting to see the therapist again, so you lose your legal right to see your children, for instance, in a family case like I had went through. Or as the therapist will now write a crap report, regardless if you're seeing a new therapist, trying again, who may or may not be acting appropriately in these critical processes. It's a vicious cycle that you may get the same result everywhere you go based on your next session could be, I just went to this therapist and this is what they did and I don't want to go through that again. So you're a prime setup for being re-abused and re-traumatized if you have a not so good clinician with bad intentions. So they say that the professionals act to enforce these boundaries. Their boundaries are more like it because it's not about our boundaries in this case when they're shutting us down. Because we're there, we don't want to be shut down at all. Because allowing a trauma loop to continue in their mind causes documented neurological damage, which is essentially true. But being highly trained, they have a way to, first of all, prevent that. Second of all, to get through it if it's occurring, not just shut somebody down and punish them. So here's how brain neurological damages occur. They act to prevent re-traumatization, the clinician. Simply talking about or reliving an intense trauma does not heal it. Without proper grounding, which is necessary, the breathing, calm down before speaking fast and continuing, having a water break and coming back 5 minutes later. There's methods. Without proper grounding, repeating the story structurally mimics the original event. So I did experience that firsthand, going from one counselor to the other, not in one day, but essentially I relived the trauma. So I thought, okay, I was venting, but when you meet somebody in your first impression, I started off with a negative story. So I did relive it. And then when I was disillusioned because they slammed me with the same thing, I didn't know they were judging me that whole time. Nor that I had been setting myself up in a trauma loop to not be safe in the first place. They call this rehashing, but they don't tell you that in these times. They don't say you're rehashing. I need you to stop in a proper way. And the brain is tricked into believing it's actively being attacked all over again. So, venting versus rumination. Healthy emotional expression leads to a release. So that's what I thought I was doing. I thought I was sharing with the new counselor and having a healthy release of the trouble. And now I'm in a safe environment and with somebody who I can trust will be treating me properly and doing the things to help me understand my mind. However, trauma looping or affective rumination acts like a power drill. It deeply carves the neural pathways further into the brain, reinforcing panic and worsening long-term anxiety. I didn't know these things, and I didn't know that I was addicted to trauma looping. I was so far entrenched in abusive situations and environments at these initial stages of dealing with psychological therapies, and there was no explanation. There was no diagnosis of, okay, you're in this deep of a condition. When you go to a hospital and they say, okay, you're in trauma or ER or whatever department, they assess you and they send you where you're to go. With this, you're at the mercy of the system. They don't tell you anything. It's just a keep coming back revolving door with no answers. So the sinking sand effect. When a person is actively looping, their nervous system is totally dysregulated. Trying to analyze or process deep trauma concepts in that exact moment is like trying to rebuild a house while it's actively on fire. The professional tries to put out the fire or stabilize the nervous system before assessing the damage. Now, this is what they're trying to do. It isn't always executed in this way, nor even explained if it is. So when a person explicitly asks for brain, behavior, and psychological information, like, yeah, why are you doing that? Why are you saying that to me? Like, why won't you let me talk about that? These are considered hostile, or if you have one of these therapists, they are treated as hostile approaches at understanding your own session that you're paying for and your own brain that they're judging and trying to change. So it's just they're not explaining that you're in an emotional mind and there's a better way to do it. It's like we are an emotional mind in a traumatic time in our life, dealing with a traumatic trauma, but being told we're overweight, and then we're like, why? I've been dieting all week and I feel I look good now, but your reasoning is all, you may be calm, but you're reliving the shame, the guilt, the trauma, the insecurities. And when you're dealing with a professional, reliving trauma and looping, it's very serious in their eyes, especially if they're going to treat you the wrong way and you have no defenses to begin with, even to get out of the trauma emotion mind. So when a person explicitly asks for brain, okay, we've done that. an AI automated system constraint, which will lock you out of a conversation and not talk to you about it anymore. Or a human professional uses what I've coined whimsical worker preference. Whatever whimsy, power trip, or lack of sleep or higher stress load they're on that day determines if you're allowed to get shut down punitively or actually process something with guided help. So that's when we're explicitly asking for things, whether on AI or in person. We oftentimes in the beginning stages, and even still, I could face this to date. I'm more advanced with recognizing it and dealing with it, but some aren't. And you might get locked out of using AI, talking about psychological concepts, and punitively, psychologically intellectualized and emotionalized and punished, or however the whimsical fairy worker is feeling that day. Fairy godmother worker or godfather worker. The reason these shutdowns occur when a person is actively seeking or asking for deeper psychological knowledge is 1. AI models claim they don't understand context like people do, but are based on math problems. And this is why you'll get, oh, I hear how frustrated and upset you are. I apologize and didn't mean to say it like that. And then in other times, you'll get a cold, I'm a robot. I don't have that kind of knowledge, and I can only give resources for that. This conversation is scheduled to stay locked out if you talk about that trauma any further. So you get very bipolaric AI results when dealing with complex trauma, even though as adults we should be able to query in input and receive generalized knowledge, regardless of whether we frame it as first person. You will get a great effect if you use third person. Mind you, the nature of very certain explicitly abusive topics that are, need intervention, they will flag those things. But if you're talking about your own past trauma and it's treating you, it's gaslighting you. If a person explains their trauma loop to provide context for their question, the AI's binary trigger safety filter feature detects the highly distressed vocabulary first before answering any other content and context. Once those safety thresholds are crossed, the AI system is programmed to execute hard, cut-off refusal. The AI is strategically designed to not see the user's question as asking a logical adult question. It only sees lawyer and psychologist programmed high-risk language and blocks interaction to prevent generating further advice. In human psychology, if a person's nervous system is dysregulated or in overdrive, psychology calls parsing or analyzing concepts in a cherry-picking way as a defense mechanism called intellectualizing. This may be so for disassociated individuals. Like, there may be people who are actually intellectualizing and nitpicking at the therapist just to poke holes, especially if you're a narcissist, let's say. But if you're highly triggered and offended, you can also be doing this, maybe not in a very provocative way or challenging way, but generally you're doing the same thing in a less extent. So it could be for the disassociated individuals looking for a ripe debate. But what about an annoyed or upset mother who's just at her wits' ends with the psychology industry, with her life situations, and finds herself in another doozie's office, who is telling her tears and her anger are violence and not trauma processing? Dare she ask more? The cognitive trap, as they call it, is is that it's a floundering survivor trying to make sense of an abuse aftermath, especially what's happening to her brain. She may feel if she just asks or gathers enough information, data, understands the terminology, or logically figures out the external or even inner loop, if she's gotten self-aware at that introspection yet, that she'll finally fix it. So they call this intellectualization, though. Or sorry, the cognitive trap. The clinician's reality is this: the therapist knows trauma is stored in the body's nervous system and not just in the brain. So it's a all around function. Like it's an entire package. So when a client demands more information while in a trauma loop, a professional may stop the appointment because providing more cognitive data actually feeds the amygdala's defense 4F fight, flight, fawn, and freeze mechanism loops, and it keeps the person trapped in their heads, completely detached from their somatic body where healing needs to happen. But if you're a mother or a woman or a youth or any person just gaining or regaining their voice, and you're finally speaking up for yourself, and you're asking questions, and you're you don't know how your brain is working, you don't know how the trauma affected you, but you're slammed with this cognitive trap of any of that is all suspicious and wrong and punishable. When a woman asks for knowledge in a distressed state, what her nervous system is actually seeking is co-regulation, so a safe, a calm, a feminine, a gentle, a soothing response from another living soul to help bring her mind and her soul back into her body, or grounding her back down to regulated. So AI says it can't co-regulate during trauma loops if it detects them, but we'll give you the full rundown of a trillion different ways if you ask how to co-regulate trauma loops in general. So just be mindful of that, aware of that when you're going through something, and it can trigger you. You think AI is no good no more, and who can I talk to? And I can't understand technology, but it's it pushes the trauma, like the voice that we don't have already, down further into that loop where it's come back. Okay, I'm gonna talk and try this, but it could be passive aggressive, and it's all around troubling. So a professional who shuts down the conversation without explaining why or providing a grounding exercise has failed to offer this co-regulation, and leaving a woman or person not only feeling intense violation, but leaving us literally stranded in our expressions and processings of our own distresses, of our own life experiences. They just left us high and dry on the spot because we're left thinking, what did I do? And that's the problem. Whoa, that sounded too emotional. Get out of here. As a woman, you can say, what did I do? Oh my God, I'm terrified. As a woman desperately trying to map out their own mind to find an exit from a trauma loop or pattern, being treated with abrupt silent refusals or clinical coldness feels completely like a high-handed punitive abuse of power or a form of institutional road rage. So the direct breakdown of this structural and systematic entrenched negligence both in AI and human institutions and practice is that AI assumes instead of asks, and human professionals don't have transparent education in traditional psychology on systemic issues, nor are they revolutionizing their doctrines at any fast rate like they do in technology in their practice. And AI doesn't pause, weigh intent, or even bother to ask, are you asking for resources, definition, or are you in immediate danger of XYZ mentioned? AI uses literal keyword matching. If words associated with severe trauma or self-harm dangers are detected, a rigid safety circuit breaker trips instantly. Thing goes off. It's no longer your friend, now it's a robot, and we're getting down to the bones. It overrides the rest of the text. No matter what you wrote, you could have wrote paragraphs is done with you. Treats your type prompts as liability, risk, and shuts down the conversation immediately. It's a blunt dismissal instrument designed by lawyers and engineers to protect corporations from liability, duty of care, etc., which wholly ignores us, the people, our explicit request for pure information, psychological information. Sort of, you bring a backpack into a store, sometimes you're automatically treated as a thief and not just someone who's carrying your personal effects and going to put your purchased items in there to carry. Therapists have a hands down overarching notoriety for teaching absolute zilch about the mind, save and except the good few who do. And there are those out there, and we do salute you, people. People, good people. It's similar to if you went to a dentist now and they did all your testings and told you absolutely nothing about what's wrong, proceeded to fix whatever the heck they wanted, and at the end, if you asked, hey, what the heck did you just do? And they said, that's it, you're being aggressive, this is over, get out, calling somebody. I've always called psychiatry and psychology mental brain surgery in a sort of way. We've got brain surgeons not only going to work, but on the most important piece of hardware that is not telling us a darn thing about what conceptual surgery they're doing or that is happening to us. So our most prized piece of hardware that we need for a living life, our brain. So, yes, I went through over 2 decades of talk therapy. Literally. Talked into circles. I don't think I have many friends in some people are lifelong friends with their therapist. I don't think I have many of those friends left. Maybe we weren't friends to begin with. I went through so punished for asking questions and knowing nothing about the brain until the last handful of years. And even then, AI is not fully cooperating with me right now. So the last handful of years right now, I have only now begun to learn the actual workings of my brain. I've had bits and pieces of the brain all along, placing it together, asking questions all these years, but now coming in Google, just Google in a decade back, I would have asked and found answers, and I did. But now with AI, you can piece it all together and you can get the working dynamic instantly, which is great to bring us up to lightning speed. Only it's not exactly working. And there are many considerations still to be careful with when we're learning about our own psychologies. So historically, the medical model positioned the clinicians as the all-knowing Ozas, experts, and the clients as passive, unreasonable patients. However, the model we need to see, where professionals are obligated to teach clients how our brains work using visual and physical and auditory aids before doing deep emotional and mental work, or the mental surgery, they do exist. This proper way of helping a woman or person through trauma loops for things such as, why do I keep meeting the same kind of partner, or having the same experiences, or getting hit on by creepy people, etc., is called psychoeducating. So this model of teaching us about our brain before they dig into our brain is called psychoeducating and psychoeducation. So the ones practicing it currently consider it criminal form of negligence for omitting this from the therapy, interviews, and treatment planning. So when a therapist, counselor, psychiatrist, etc. fails to psychoeducate and punishes instead of criminalizes information seeking and emotional work processing, it stems from 3 systemic failures. Misinterpreting trauma, agitation as malice, number 1. Survivors of severe external abuse, like NPD or sexual traumas, go to clinics with highly sensitized nervous systems. When they loop or become agitated by statements or procedures, an untrained or rigid therapist often misinterprets this adaptive survival response as resistance, hostility, or a behavioral and personality defect rather